Good afternoon, passengers. Welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda, and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 15, the first Martel Air freight flight, a round trip from Canberra to Gabo Island lighthouse and back, delivering 3,000 kilograms of cargo. So grab your seats while I finish up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of this de Havilland of Canada Caribou, the largest member of the Martel Air fleet. And we have a lovely external view of this rather large plane. The tail is nice and high, both for cargo loading and for short takeoff and landing, so that if you pull up, the tail doesn't hit. Twin engine radial propellers here with it's actually a World War II design that is just really quite powerful. And I've been having rather a lot of fun designing the livery for this, including nice slogan along the bottom of the wing there, and of course some antlers. And the nose with the little tongue of the tail wheel door there. And of course, one of the fun features of the Caribou is this big cargo door at the back, which can also be opened in flight if you need to do dramatic cargo unloading operations. One of the classics, of course, being open the back door, attach a parachute to the cargo, throw the parachute out the back. Make sure that the cargo is not strapped down when you do. I was told the other day of an incident where somebody was trying to drop a Hummer, or Humvee, because, you know, the actual military one, not the wanky city one, trying to drop a Humvee out the back, threw out the big parachute. It was still strapped down. Oh no, that wasn't a Caribou though, that was one of the ones that replaced it. Anyway, make sure it's not strapped down when you throw the parachute out. And yes, unfortunately, the one thing that the Microsoft Flight Sim model does not include is actually showing the cargo. Instead, we've got our lovely little seating area here, so we'll be having cargo through most of it, and all of your passenger seating, including if you want to have a nap during the flight, often used for medical purposes instead. But anyway, and the other feature that we'll be making use of is mounting a small camera to the tip of the tail, which gets us to here. Lovely view from the top of the tail of the wings, which we'll be using for some of our checks before takeoff. Okay, checklists. Before engine start checklist. Parking brake is set. Forward panel, external light switches off. Warning light switches to bright. DC generator switches on and guard. AC inverter switch off. Boost pumps off. Fuel tank selector normal. De-icing switches off. Oil dilution switches off. And prop feather knobs both off. Carb heat levers closed. Flaps up. Ignition switches off. Taxi lights off. Landing lights off. Throttles closed. Props max increase. Mixture cut off. Gust lock handle locked. Landing gear handle down. Electrical panel. Bit of a lag there. Circuit breakers are in. Cargo door control switch is off. Before engine start checklist complete. The weather today is quite windy, as you can possibly hear, and we're cruising at an altitude of 8 to 10,000 feet, flying over the mountainous parts of New South Wales and Victoria en route. Your cabin crew today is me, and your emergency exits are located in the rear of the cabin in those nice door-shaped doors to either side of the cargo door. I also have some emergency exits above and below me, so if you see me leave through this door, please follow me quickly. My co-pilot today, as always, is Wing Commander Lamington, and our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you pack something interesting. Engine start procedures. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Throttle levers cracked open. Right hand boost pump to normal. Priming switch to right. Master start switch on. Priming switch off. Mixture to auto lean. Start switch to right. And ignition switch on. And master start switch off. Throttle lever set for 800 RPM. Right hand boost pump off. Oil pressure within required measurements. Right engine started. Left engine battery on. Throttle set. Left hand boost pump on. Priming switch left. Master start switch on. Priming switch off. Mixture lever set. Ignition left. Left ignition to both. Start switch off. Throttle set. Mixture lever, auto rich, boost pump, left boost pump, off. Oil pressure, check. Engine start checklist complete. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices, apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air Freight. We hope you don't die. After engine start checklist, throttle levers 1000, AC inverter to main, panel lighting set, compass alignment just off 21, check, pilot compass setting slave, and GPS panel bright, set. GPS system. So, the Caribou is equipped with a Garmin 430 GPS, which is quite basic. The navigation system is essentially such that we get something like a VOR beacon on the pilot's compass, and that is most of your GPS navigation. So I am setting this up manually. This is an addition that the Caribou did not typically have, but it certainly makes things easier for navigation purposes, even if I am just using it to point me the way towards where I need to get to. Okay, GPS system setup complete. And it, has acquired signal. Hydraulic pressure, check. Brake hydraulics, check. After engine start, checklist complete. Now, one thing that is not seen on the Cessna Grand Caravan that I typically fly is the engine run-up checklist. So, engine run-up checklist. Area around and behind aircraft. We go back to our... Oh, listen to those engines. So we can see that there is nobody standing too close to the engines, and we can see that they are both turning nicely. But listen to those engines. Drum, 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 drum. Okay. Parking brake handle set. Mixture levers auto rich. 1200 RPM checks. Throttles set for 1200. Oil temperatures over 40 degrees, check. Flaps lever to 40 degrees. Flap gauge shows 40, and visual checks. The barn doors are open and down. So the flaps on the Caribou are enormous, and if you have them at 40 degrees in flight, it will feel like you might as well get out and walk. This is part of what makes them so good on short runways. Okay, flaps lever all the way up. Gauge shows full retraction, visual check, full retraction, check. Pitot heat switch on. 1900 RPM checks. Gust lock handle unlocked. Throttle levers set for 1900 RPM. While checking that the brakes are holding. If your brakes fail during this check, you go forward very rapidly. Okay, 1900 RPM set. Prop levers, minimum decrease. Prop RPM drops to approximately 1200. Check. Prop levers, max increase. 2200 RPM checks. Throttle levers set for 22. Manifold pressure approximately QNH. Manifold pressure is holding at about 30, which is correct. correct. Thrust gauges match left and right. Check. Feather system check, set for 1900 RPM. Feather left engine. And feathering properly, check. And feather right engine. Check. Okay, propeller feather system check complete. Idle checks, throttle to idle, prop RPM approximately 600, check, and gust lock handle, check, locked. Engine run-up checklist complete. So, all of those checks just let me know that the engines are running correctly, and the gust lock is a wonderful little thing that stops the control surfaces flapping around in the gusting up to 30 knots winds that we're having at the moment. And it also stops you putting the engines up to anything like max throttle. And that's a safety feature, that's by the gust lock handle is just in the way of the throttle levers. And the reason that that's like that is so that if you try to take off with the gust locks, aka with absolutely zero flight surface control, you won't be able to get anywhere near takeoff speed, so you can't screw up that way. It does, however, result in some newer pilots complaining that the Caribou has almost no takeoff power because they forget the gust locks. Okay, before takeoff checklist, rear cargo door. Right, for this one, I'm just going to shimmy across into a spot where we can watch. And yes, there are separate switches for the ramp and the door, so that you can have one or the other. Oh, I love watching that. Lovely. Rear cargo door. Closed. Ramp and cargo switches off and guard. Cargo door switch off. And you might notice that you can see little peaks of daylight down each side of the cargo door. That's because it's not sealed even slightly. This is not a pressurized plane. This is a short takeoff and landing cargo plane designed to operate wherever the heck it likes. Possibly with supplementary oxygen for anybody on board. Okay. Cabin lights. On. No smoking light on. Seatbelt light on. Cargo and cabin heating. I think we will get this switched on. So, cabin on and start the gas heater. I think, let's set it to about 70 Fahrenheit. The joys of older, and you know, they base the flight sim model on an American one, and we'll start the cockpit heater as well. And air to the cabin is on. So, cockpit and cabin heating set. De-icing systems, check. Flaps lever up. wing and tail lights on. Taxi lights on. Taxi clearance. Canberra ground, Martel 15 with information Yankee, requests taxi for takeoff with a south departure. Taxi to and hold short, runway 17 using taxiway Charlie Bravo cross runway 30 Bravo Echo, Martel 15. Taxi clearance check. Okay. And parking brake release. Now, trusting our ground handlers there to let us know that it is safe, we engage reverse thrust. One of the joys of the Caribou is that the engine reversers are designed to essentially stop the plane in flight, so it has quite the taxi performance when you decide to turn it backwards. So you actually need to be fairly careful to not overspeed backwards. And wonderful turning circle from the nose gear. And this is one of those planes where they actually suggest not using differential braking for ground handling because it puts too much stress and wear on the landing gear, which is a fun little detail. But luckily it has this remarkably maneuverable front wheel, and it will just pivot essentially on one of the main wheels, not quite spinning in a circle just because that would flat spot your tyre. And it has this lovely dropped nose, so you'll notice excellent visibility down the front for both landings and for ground handling. Okay, and watching our speed. Last element on the checklist is brake test. Brakes, very functional. Lovely. So, before departure taxi checklist is complete. And goodbye, Masana. I'm glad you got some fun out of watching my takeoff preparations. And now, more making sure I don't overspeed this thing on the ground just by mishandling the throttles and brakes on this taxi. Being two engines, both of which are more powerful than the Caravan, it is very much easy to accidentally get this thing going a little fast on the taxi. Runway 30 is inactive, but we will just glance anyway. Because as I often say in real life while driving, am I going to trust my life to a Canberra driver obeying the road rules? And one of the other fun things about the ground handling for the Caribou is that the recommended the recommended braking system for extended ground operations is actually to use the reversers more than the wheel brakes, because the reversers don't overheat as much as excessive use of the brakes, so might as well use the reversers so long as you're, clear of ground staff. The Caravan also has reversers that get used for reducing landing distances, but nothing like as mighty as the Caribou. And the other thing that the Caribou notably lacks is any autopilot. So where I would normally be setting up for a fairly normal flight by configuring the autopilot such that once I'm off the ground I can have it take over, the autopilot type configuration that I can do in the Caribou is trimming it such that it defaults to flying straight and level. And any more than that, and I've got to do it myself. So, real-world Caribou pilots often describe it as basically exhausting, just because you're always flying the plane, you're never taking your hand off the controls. So, hopefully we don't need Wing Commander Lamington to pounce on the co-pilot's yoke and correct any of my mistakes. But one of the things that can happen is if the trim is just slightly off, it'll just roll a couple of degrees, and then if you're not focusing, you might be facing a third of a turn away from where you thought you were going, which is really embarrassing. Because being a slightly larger plane, and in this case I've actually got it loaded slightly above the recommended maximum takeoff weight, which it is still rated to do. So, it will be an interesting little takeoff. But here we go. Parking brake, before takeoff checklist, parking brake handle is set. Altimeter QNH set, and verifying that that is the airport altitude. Elevator trim in takeoff range. Check. GPS system ready. Check. And dashboard system check. 141 nautical miles to Gabo Island. Carb heat levers cold. Prop levers max increase. Mixture auto rich. Boost pump switches normal. Fuel tank selector normal. DC generators on and guard. AC inverter main. Anti-collision lights on. Landing light switches on. And notice that these lights also have infrared mode, which is a fancy military thing, quite a lot of fun. Engine instruments, no warning lights, check. Fuel quantity, check. What are you doing? Flap sleeve at this weight rating, the required takeoff position for flaps is up. an interesting thing with the Caribou of if you are above a certain weight rating, you do flaps up takeoffs, which is a little spicy. Takeoff clearance. Canberra Tower, Martel 15, ready at runway 17 for departure to the south. Cleared to take off runway 17, Martel 15. So we've got 22 knot winds, but mostly straight down the runway, which is helpful. Gust locks off. And parking brake release. Okay. Takeoff checklist. Flaps 0. Taxi onto the runway. So yes, that is quite a bit more checklist content than we usually get for the much more automated Caravan, so hopefully people are enjoying that. Lining up runway center line. Ooh. And here's the next guy coming in for their takeoff. Throttle lever, advance to maximum or 50. Rotate speed. And gear up. Now, from both the spinning of the engines and the difference in weight between myself and Wing Commander Lamington, this plane really wants to roll us to the left. Which is where the trimming begins. Canberra Tower, Martel 15, continue for south departure. And luckily we are already basically pointed to our destination. If we had been taking off facing into the north, as Canberra Airport does much more often, we would have had to do a full 180 and be careful about which way we turned, because this plane is big enough to hit onto the Canberra Airport, Canberra overflight noise abatement rules, which the Caravan is small enough to ignore. Okay, VY is set, throttles to METO, propellers RPM to METO, gear is up, and flaps are up. And taxi lights off. So it's a little bit slower of a climb than it might otherwise be, with 3,000 kilograms of cargo in the back, and also reasonably full fuel tanks, because Gabo Island is a lighthouse with a 2,000-foot grass lawn that does not have the facilities to refuel this beast. But still, we're managing 1,000 feet climb while holding our airspeed. Going to 125.9, Martel 15. Canberra approach, Martel 15 is typed to Havilland Caribou, 4 miles south of Canberra at 4,700 feet. Request clearing of transition Charlie airspace. Squawk 6345, Martel 15. Cleared through the Charlie airspace, Martel 15. Okay. So now we start making sure that all of our trim is set. Climb trim is always a bit interesting. So the METO setting that I was mentioning before is maximum except takeoff, which is the green... Ooh, there is that roll kicking in. Ooh, what's that? I think we just got caught by a really hefty wind gust there. That was weird. Engines are still both equal. I do not know what happened just there. That was wild. As I was saying, METO, maximum except takeoff, which is the green band on my engine instruments that I've just looked across and are hidden behind my face for you. Well, once I've got... I know what happened. I was adjusting the trim and it pulled up a little too hard and stalled lightly. Oh, that's close. What are you doing? Grumpy words to be had with Canberra air traffic control over that one. Okay, so the odd roll to the left was I was focusing too much on explaining things and adjusting the trim into a climb trim and lightly stalled the aircraft. That's embarrassing. But yes, as I was saying, the maximum except takeoff settings on the engines are these lovely green bands here. So that is used for climb thrust, and as the manifold pressure, which is essentially the throttle setting, is an air pressure that's also based on outside air pressure, it actually keeps dropping. So once we reduce it after takeoff and then increase it as the air thins, because what that throttle setting does changes for us. Okay. Cruise climb checklist. Throttle levers set for METO. Prop levers set for METO. Fuel auto rich. Airspeed approximately 105. Carb heat not. Carb heat tending towards required. What's our outside temperature? It is slightly below freezing outside, and there is that left roll that I am trying to trim out. So let's do a little bit of carb heat on both sides. Just keep the air nicely burnable as it comes into the engines, although that does cut into our thrust a little. And de-icing switches are as required, I think. And we are now out of the traffic area, so landing lights off. Getting the aileron trim set just right is always fun. And whether you're using aileron trim or rudder trim is a whole set of complexities. Okay, as we approach cruise, I check the power settings we'll need to set. let's see here, fairly heavy, let's say 10,000 feet, 32 and 22. So one of the things with getting this all set up properly is that there are tables and graphs for giving what engine settings give you the best cruise performance. And as I am flying a little, I'm actually between two of the numbers that I've sketched out here, just because it's a little bit over the maximum. I might use those numbers actually, so 29.7 and 21. Essentially it gives me the manifold pressure and the propeller RPM that I want to have set for best cruise performance. And as a backup, all of them are approximately 30 inches of pressure on the manifold and 2000 RPM on the propellers. So, if in doubt, the correct settings are nearly 30-20, so you can just set there while you get ready and work out the actual numbers. And unfortunately, Flight Sim does not correctly model the auto mixture control. So on the Caribou it's got auto rich and auto lean, whereas the Flight Sim Caribou has a full mixture control lever. So I will be fiddling with that of what gives us the best power output at the altitude we end up leveling off at. And as you can see, I am having to concentrate that a little bit more than I usually do, because this thing wants to not fly exactly where I tell it, because it doesn't have a tell it to just do the thing consistently. But you can see why autopilot for aircraft was developed. But here we go. Yes, the altitude gauge has this odd tendency of not being sure if it's showing you 9 or 10,000. It's between numbers while pointing at 0. I think I want to be one more up. And of course, all of the cruise trim settings that I'd set up, as soon as the climb settings, as soon as we try to level off at a more normal cruising attitude, will end up being wrong again, so I'll have to reset everything again. Coming up on 1000, I think that's the right number of zeros, 10,000 feet. And there's that slight tendency to roll if you're not paying perfect attention, because I was spending too much time looking at the altitude and vertical speed. But we are still heading towards the runway that we would like to be hitting. Our 10,000 feet. Now, unlike in something with autopilot, we won't be holding this perfectly to within 10 feet, as might be expected, but the way we set our cruise is step 1, we point the nose where we want to be, and get the nose to a stable vertical speed, and as we pick up a little bit of speed we level off nicely, and then we set our throttles to where we want to be. So there is our cruise settings, and then we set the trim such that we're not having to maintain pressure on the controls. We're still maintaining a hand on the controls, but we're not having to push heavily. Going to 118.8 Martel 15. Melbourne Centre, Martel 15 is type de Havilland Caribou, 19 miles south of Canberra, 10,000 feet, request light following. Squawk 6522, Martel 15. QNH 3028, Martel 15. Okay. And now it's holding fairly straight and fairly level. So, throttle levers set, prop levers set. Carb heat is within good range. De-icing switches set. Boost pump switches remaining on. Since there's a little bit of using the rudder trim and there's a little bit of using the aileron trim, because some of the roll is an actual roll moment and some of it is just balancing everything out. But yes, so we are now trimmed to fly more or less straight and level, minus wind gusts, which means that I now have a lot smaller workload. I need to be monitoring our heading, our speed, our altitude, but that's monitoring, not actively driving everything to stay exactly as I want it to be. So, that was the most work for a takeoff I've done on stream. And I can definitely see why the actual Caribou has a 3-person crew minimum. There's often 4, which is even more interesting. But given there is almost no automation, I will happily use the few bits of flight sim automation that it gives us just to essentially represent Wing Commander Lamington bapping at the controls with his paws and biting the switches that need biting. And also the invisible third crew member, the flight engineer, who I can only assume is a cat somewhere in the cabin just running around and chewing on cables as required. But yes, so pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer who is actively engineer monitoring the engines, and loadmaster, because if you get the load set up wrong in one of these, it might just fall out of the sky. Cargo planes of, notable weights of cargo are actually slightly terrifying sometimes if you look at what happens if you get the loading wrong, because essentially planes have to be balanced on the point of the center of lift, because if you think about these big chunky wings out here, that is all that is holding us in the sky. The way that modern planes will do a lot of that is that they actually, the rear wing is pushing down instead of up, just so that what your pitch trim is actually doing is controlling the balance point ever so slightly, such that you maintain your position in the sky. And the thing about cargo is that if it shifts, it might shift a lot more notably than anything on a passenger plane. If a passenger decides to wander to the back of the plane for the fact that that's where the toilets are, you know, that's 100 kilos rolling all the way to the back. But, you know, it's a fairly small percentage of the plane itself, and that's small enough that you can just kind of deal with that. That's keeping your center of balance and center of weight within the operable envelope. There is a notable bit of footage that is honestly really quite disturbing of a US cargo plane, I think C-130, possibly 747, taking off from one of their military bases, and then it just kind of pitches up and falls out of the sky and falls straight down from normal flight with just this is now a brick. And basically what happened there's, you know, numerous documentaries on the of the air crash investigation type. It was transporting a whole bunch of vehicles, and one of them wasn't strapped down well enough. So when they pulled up for the takeoff, it rolled backwards into the smaller vehicle behind it, broke its straps, and then they both went to the back of the plane and went out. Like, the last vehicle's spare tire on the back had pieces of the rear bulkhead of the plane embedded in it. And yeah, essentially the plane went from here to here, so it went from doing this to doing this, and it just and it's one of those things where the video of this happening, like the actual film of it, made it onto the various parts of the internet. So this is one that I unfortunately have seen before I realized what I was seeing. It's not gory until you realize that there's 3 people in that plane, possibly 4. You know, luckily, despite being, I think it was a 747 freighter conversion, so, you know, despite being a 747, it was only 3 or 4 people in there, but still. And it is, you're used to planes flying, and having one just fall out of the sky is slightly terrifying to see. And yes, races up and down the cargo deck. Again, passengers are not too bad, but if you do, say, car races up and down the cargo deck, 1, I'm impressed, and 2, we're dying. So that was a bit morbid, but yeah, so that's how strange cargo flights can be. And then, of course, there's all of the ones that illustrate why they are very, very touchy about lithium-ion batteries on flights. Because, you know, having one lithium-ion battery go up in a passenger plane, that's bad. Like, the amount of energy contained in them is the point of them, and they don't actually require oxygen to burn. But there have been a few notable cargo planes that had the problem of an entire pallet full of either just the batteries or brand new phones with the batteries, that, yeah, you can't put those fires out. But luckily, we just have 3,000 kilos of combined passengers and miscellaneous furniture. There's probably a pool table, I think, because pool tables are ridiculously heavy because they use a stone slab for the surface if you get a properly made one. So, you know, nice and dense and weighty. So that's what we're carrying. So, you know, nice and safe. And so we will get to see the heavily loaded with cargo landing procedures. I mean, you know, the fancy stuff, yeah, like... So, whoever at Gabo Island Lighthouse has ordered this has spent enough that instead of getting it delivered by, you know, someone with a boat from nearby, they've got a Caribou coming out to do the delivery from Canberra. So, they're clearly, you know, splashing out on this stuff. So, you know, we want to make sure it's a nice smooth landing to not damage any of their stuff. And also to not damage any of my stuff, like the plane. Or, you know, any of Wing Commander Lamington's stuff, like the dog biscuits, which is clearly the most important part of this. And we have all of the lovely crinkly bits of southeastern Australia. We get fairly close to flying over places like Mount Kosciuszko on this flight. I don't know if it's government contract. The role-playing side of all of the cargo carrying and other things, like, you know, it was a government contract when we were flying into East Sail, just to give us an excuse to fly into the RAF base, but I don't know if... I feel like if it's got a good pool table, it might not be a government contract, unless it's like they're going to be putting some public service executives in there. They seem to end up with the nicer furniture than the rest of us. Now, ooh, there is that roll trying to kick in, but caught it before it actually turned us. And one of the interesting little features of having to have my hand on the joystick is that with this setup, my joystick hand and my beverage hand are the same hand, because despite the fact that I am a set up for the pilot's seat, my desk setup is actually for what would be a co-pilot's position of left hand throttles and right hand on the controls. Look, I'm not going to comment on whether we've got any government ministers strapped inside the stone blocks of this pool table. That is none of my business. But yeah, so I am set up with a co-pilot's right-handed driving. I've got the yokes visuals turned off because they're quite bulky on the Caribou, and it makes it hard in flight sim to see the actual instruments. But part of the reason I've got the co-pilot set up with right-handed joystick is that joysticks are expensive, and when I bought mine about 10 years ago, the only one on the market easily available was the Logitech Extreme 3D Pro, which is essentially like the standard baseline joystick and has been for 20 plus years. Like, this is the same model of joystick that we bought when I was in high school, which is a terrifying thought of, no, this is... They worked out what a good joystick model is and stayed there. And unfortunately, the one design thing about that, like, it's very comfortable handle, but also it's a chiral handle, so it is right hand only. I'm now picturing, like, I have people who could probably 3D print me a new casing to turn this into a left-handed one, that would be wild. And thank you for giving Wing Commander Lamington delicious treats. It is exactly what he deserves. Okay, engine settings are still good. Fuel is looking good. Heading is pretty much right. Altitude is pretty much right. But again, still actively flying this thing. Ooh, lovely little bit of haze. I am fascinated by how much extra concentration it is taking, and the fact that I'm not slipping up too much yet, which is nice. So yes, the reason that there are different, like, reversed control sets for pilot and co-pilot is throttle cluster is in the middle of the plane, and you only have one of them. So you have the side that the throttle cluster is on is the throttle cluster side, and then the other side is for your flight control. So with the tradition that pilots are on the left, because, you know, Americans and I think Europeans, you know, all those people who love to drive on the wrong side of the road while insisting that it's the right just for grammatical reasons, have set what the standards are. And, you know, even Australia doesn't try to go against that, as far as I know. It would be a bit weird. And over here we see the reason that our cruising altitude is a minimum of 8,000 feet, because as previously explored on one flight, the tallest mountain in Australia is about 7,500 feet, so if we set 8,000 as a minimum, we don't need to worry too much, which is lovely. And my checklists are on a lovely 300 GSM card, which means that, look, sometimes I need two hands to flick through them at maximum speed. So that's fun, but it is a delightful little object. So after I got them all designed and tested, I had them printed up at the local office works on 300 GSM card and comb bound. And I'm rather pleased with the typesetting design that I did. Just showing that off and also making sure to fly the plane. So, you know, got a font that is fairly similar to the actual 1970s electric typesetting. So, not actually typewriter, it would be computer controlled, but monospaced font that looks like the stuff you get out of a typewriter, but, you know, can be done en masse. And it was a fun little research project, because one of the things I was sent along with the money to buy the plane files was the US Army and US Air Force manuals and checklist flipbook, as well, links to the PDFs, because actually getting the printed ones would have been wild. So my checklists are based on the US Air Force checklists, modified for the slight changes required in Flight Sim. Oh, nice and stable here, which is lovely. And the way that the US Air Force checklists make it so that you can flip through them quicker is that each section is slightly longer than the last, or each, you know, as you go further forward into the flip book, they are slightly shorter, so that along the bottom of each page you have the section name, so you hold the section name and just flick it and you're on the right page, which is lovely. But given that it took Officeworks 2 tries to even get the comb binding for this on the right edge of the document, despite putting a lovely wide top margin and narrow side margins, they still gave it to me long edge bound along the sides, which is very silly. And then, oh, okay, can we just cut that set of holes off and redo it? Like, I'd like something nice, like I paid you guys for. The joys of the printing service run by basic, untrained retail staff. But, you know, as finished, it is a delightful little physical object. I love delightful little physical objects. And this one is so nice to handle. And so, you know, I paid a bit extra to have 300 GSM card instead of just plain paper. And I am entirely fine with that decision, because it is... I mean, it's 14 pages long, but it's probably about 6 mil thick. So, you know, very nice object. It's very different compared to the slick graphic design I did for the Caravan checklists, which the Caravan checklist style very much matches the sleek modern designs of what the Martel Air brand is going for, and it's a, you know, A4 two-sided. But there was no way I could get the Caribou checklists onto a single A4 two-sided page. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to go all out and research 1960s typesetting graphical design. And, you know, a misspent youth of doing text-based things online in usually Courier New as a monospace font means that my design skills are actually ready for that sort of challenge. One of the things that I found really delightful about it is that one of the features of these typesetting machines is that you essentially have to load a new chunky bit of memory hardware to change font or even font size. So it's all the same font size. You do your emphasis with capitals and underscore. It's not even going into bold or italic, because I actually think that the italic especially, but possibly even bold, would require again that change of chunky. It's not a disc, that's far too small an object for what these are like. But I have managed to move my drink over to the throttle cluster side, which does mean that as I take a sip, I hit the microphone. I don't know if that made a noise that was annoying, but anyway. Now I just have to hope I don't bump that and knock the nice wine glass and, you know, have it smash down onto the ground. That would be quite disappointing. So we have 81 nautical miles to go until Gabo Island, and we are holding 121 knots ground speed. This is one of the things that I like about the GPS system on this, is that we have this little screen above the engine instruments. I'm just going to bump that slightly to the side so that I can still see the artificial horizon and other flight instruments. So it's telling us, you know, distance 80 nautical miles, ground speed. We've just hit a headwind, I think, because that's dropped to 109, 110. Bearing 156 degrees. And waypoint name, Yankee Golf Bravo Oscar, Gabo Island Lighthouse. Which is a delightful little... So, yes, the GPS in this, instead of giving us the full map view that we're used to on the Caravan, which technically there is a tiny screen version of down here, which I think if I click on that one, we can see it. So, you know, I'm not actually on the pink line, just because drift from being pushed by crosswinds and the fact that I'm flying towards the waypoint, not flying specifically along that line. So yes, it's acting like an omnidirectional beacon of where the next waypoint in the GPS is, rather than having the full navigation stuff from... Okay, so a little bit of weird wind stuff there and some not focusing. Just pulling through that. So yeah, you know, we got 300 feet below our preferred cruising altitude. I usually try and keep it plus or minus 50 as a focus. Plus or minus 100 is a good range, I find, on this. But, so you know, on a plane with autopilot, it's usually something like within 30 feet. So, and again, as we're flying over mountains, we're getting changing wind directions, which is changing airspeed and ground speed, dropping down to 100 knots ground speed, which is, you know, quite a bit slower than we were doing. Fine-tuning the fuel settings. And of course, as the fuel tanks gradually empty, our center of gravity is shifting, which is always a little bit spicy, as discussed before, but it is a slow, gradual, clean sort of shift when the center of gravity shifts from the fuel tanks emptying. And the fuel tanks being in the wings also means that their weight is really quite well centered. That's one of the advantages of the fuel tanks in the wings, is that the weight is on the wings. And also, the weight is helping stop the wings flexing so much by making them a bit heavier. There's some fascinatingly complicated physics with that. But yes, this lovely complicated set of mountains here is doing wind things that are making this more focus required. Yes, the hand flying of this it's an interesting extra challenge over the normal, you know, set it on autopilot and give yourself a break sort of flying I've been doing in the Caravan. So as part of getting ready for debuting this plane on stream, one of the things I've been doing is doing some longer flights in it. So one that I did a week or two ago was I did Canberra to Adelaide, which at the speeds of the Caribou, and you know, we're holding about 120 knots ground speed and airspeed. That was a 4-hour flight, all on manual control, and we just managed to get up to 300 feet above where we want to be. Look, at least we've managed to keep on course. That's something. So yes, I did a 4-hour manual solo flight, just so you know, not on stream or anything, just on my own. This was during the time that I was off work and off streaming for COVID reasons. where it was just enough mental and physical activity to keep me focused on something, as in keeping me awake, which I was having trouble with during that week. And a lot more interesting than the times I've done a similar flight length in an A320 or a 747. I think it's the A320, or, well, I think it's an A320 Neo. A32NX is the code in-game for it. But you don't fly those, you just kind of operate them. In the same way that I operate my computer when it's running some code. Which, you know, all of the little details involved in programming the airliners to do their thing is a fun little challenge. And I will do those flights occasionally just because they are fun and complicated. But I think it would make the most absolutely dull stream I can imagine. So, the Caravan that I usually fly is the most automated plane you will see me do on stream. Unless something weird happens to change my mind on that later, but at this point, yeah, nothing more automated than the Cessna Grand Caravan EX. And the Caribou is, you know, it's a fun plane. One of the things that I have remarked on before is that so many of the newer planes get described as swans and thoroughbred racehorses and eagles. And the thing about, I mean, the thoroughbred racehorses especially, yeah, those are fast and sleek and amazing and fragile. Whereas the Caribou, people keep calling the Caribou ugly, which, I mean, one, I don't actually agree with. It's not sleek. It is a cargo plane that knows what it's doing. But it's got that adorable nose with the two intakes on it. Just, its nose has nostrils. And, like, I specifically painted this up as a Caribou's nose with the little tongue. But my vision of the Caribou is that it's not a thoroughbred racehorse, it's a mule. It is sturdy, dependable, stubborn, and capable of going basically anywhere. So, you know, the short takeoff and landing capabilities of it, when we lined up on the Canberra airport runway, Shire Horse, I think Shire Horse is more like, possibly the Herc, that's, you know, nice and strong and capable of doing all these things, but I mean, the reason they kept the Caribou in operation for so long, so, you know, this is World War II engines and a 1960s airframe, and the RAF retired them in 2009. That was purely because nothing had the cargo capacity and the ridiculous excuse for a runway capacity that the Caribou does. So I really think it is one of those mules that will just take you up any mountain without caring that the mountain's there. Like, a Shire Horse will get you, you know, it will move anything, but might not be as good on ridiculous terrain. So, you know, some of the bigger military cargo planes that, yeah, just load up whatever, it'll take it. Especially remaining with the prop ones. But, yeah, I think just stubborn, dependable mule is my opinion of the Caribou at this stage, and I love it so much. cylinder head temps are good, carb temps are good, oil pressure, fuel pressure good, cruise RPM still set, thrust is good, just check the mixture, yep. And altitude is holding nicely with 57 nautical miles to go. So yes, this is going to be one of my longest streams, so I am 100% not expecting everybody to make it from first takeoff to, well, from engine start to final shutdown, except for me and Wing Commander Lamington. We'll see who drifts in and out. Just because I will be doing this as a round trip of the full weight landing at Gabo Island and then the unloaded takeoff from the 2,000 foot grass strip. So that will be quite the delightful little contrast. I will not be demonstrating the Caribou's party trick of the wheelbarrow maneuver, just because that's a lot more practice than I have, which is kind of the point of being able to show it off. But yes, when we come in for landing, it will be a fairly full-flapped landing just to make sure we make it in the distance. But given how the Caribou goes with short runways, it gets... yeah, that 2,000 foot runway, which I would have an interesting time doing in the Caravan, absolutely no trouble for the Caribou. So when we were taking off from Canberra Airport with our full load, we hit the rotation speed around about the 1,000 foot markers on the runway. And when doing short field landings in it, I have managed to land in probably about 500 feet from the threshold. We're coming in a little bit heavier, so I will be using a bit more of the runway just to make sure of things. But yeah, the Caribou, when you do a full flaps landing and it tries to stop in mid-air, so you know, the maximum speed for 40 degrees of flaps is 80 knots, which is quite slow. And the maximum speed for having the cargo door open and the ramp down to 15 degrees is 120 knots. So slightly slower than our current cruising speed. We could have the back doors completely open and it wouldn't really stress the airframe. Like, it's not as aerodynamic when you're doing that. It likes to slow down a lot more. But it'll do it. So, you know, quite good for parachute drops, either of cargo, as previously mentioned, or, you know, 30 people just, you know, line up in 2 rows, and every second or so the next person steps off the back ramp. So you can empty the plane fairly quickly doing a paradrop through the cargo doors at just a hair under cruising speed. There are side doors as well, which I sometimes, so on this one are marked as emergency exit, but are actually the primary passenger doors. But yeah, the fact that the main cargo door is the back rather than the sides means you can have it open in flight and just everybody run, or, you know, attach a parachute to your pallet and throw the parachute and unstrap the pallet first. And you can see on the map that we are getting a little bit closer to the south coast, which indeed there it is. And Gabo Island is just down past the southern edge of this coast. And with crosswinds and everything, our path has skewed slightly. And one of the things that we have to make sure of is not leaving the descent too late. Otherwise we'll just kind of be circling Gabo Island while trying to descend rather than actually landing and having fun. And there's about a 400-foot slip down from our preferred altitude, which we'll be holding at least for the next little bit. As I also make sure to pull that up. And of course, not making any corrections too briskly, because that is the way that you fall out of the sky. Traffic report. 8 o'clock, 4 miles at my altitude. Yeah, I can't see out the back of the plane, sorry mate. But they have us inside. Martel 1-5 traffic not in sight. The traffic controlling stuff loves to make sure that you're reporting traffic in sight and neglects the fact that this plane has visibility essentially kind of 8 o'clock through 8 o'clock through 3 o'clock for the pilot, and probably 9 through 4 for the co-pilot. But yet not so much on the looking straight out the back. One of those fun little intricacies of the flight models and traffic system. Now, glancing over at our weather report, it looks like Gabo Island will be using runway 24, which has a 9-knot headwind and a 17-knot crosswind. And yes, I could in fact do the visibility out the back just by opening the cargo door. I would in fact be stepping away from the controls to do that, and I don't think reporting a plane in sight is quite worth that level of effort. Okay. So, runway 23. I'm gonna get this marker and set that to the runway heading, just so that I have a marker for where that will be. Useful little trick. And I always have to remember that one of the two knobs below the compass there gives me the set that marker, and the other knob changes the compass setting, which I don't want. You know, that knob is very useful for when you are having gyro compass drift and you want to reset it to what the magnetic compass is doing, which I am just going to double check. No, that is still lovely and accurate. But when you are trying to quickly set a heading marker, less useful. And the other little modern upgrade to the Caribou that Flight Sim has given us is a radar altimeter over on the left here, and so I will set the alert light height for that to 250. So that just as we are coming in, we get this lovely little alert that we are at approximately the altitude where we really need to start paying attention to the ground. But of course, one of the things about landing at Gabo Island is that our approach is going to be entirely over water. Okay, so we're at about 35 nautical miles from Gabo Island, so I'm going to begin our descent. De-ice, what's the outside temperature? Oh, about -5. I love the fact that the outside air temperature is on a little thermometer outside the cabin, because that's where it's measuring from. Lovely little industrial feeling touch. Okay, de-icing switches set. Throttle levers remaining set for cruise, which is not how many planes do their descents. Fuel boost switches normal. Fuel tank selector normal. No smoking lights and seatbelt lights are remaining on. You will notice that the seatbelt light has remained on through this entire flight because it's, you know, military and a bit industrial and a freight aircraft, so yeah. No seatbelts off in the middle of the flight on this one. And altimeter QNH is set. Okay, so beginning descent. And we just drop the nose for a nice about 1,000 feet per minute descent. And this is one of the parts where instead of using the trim and autopilot and everything for this, we just hold the nose where it needs to be and monitor the engine manifold pressure. Because as I was saying during the climb out, the manifold pressure is based on both the throttle settings and the outside air pressure. So as we descend into thicker air and also slightly bumpier air, the manifold pressure keeps creeping up. And we are just passing through 30 nautical miles and 8,500 feet. And we are watching our airspeed getting up to 150, 160 knots. The never exceed speed is 208 knots. But yes, the Caribou's descent checklists usually call for maintaining cruise throttle for the descent, which means that you do pick up quite a bit of a forward velocity while doing your descent, which is part of why we start them nice and early. If I needed to descend much more rapidly, I could of course cut the throttle down quite a bit, but by starting it at 35 miles, we've got plenty of time for just pushing down. And of course, as we speed up, we get more lift, which means that the nose wants to pick up more. Or that the, not that the nose wants to pick up, but that the vertical speed from the same nose position increases, or decreases, because more lift, which means we have to push the nose down a little bit more, which means that we pick up a little bit more speed. But you can make it so that, no, you're actually just going to start slowing down now, or, you know, increasing your dive speed a little too much. So there is a lot to fiddle and focus. Now, as this is a non-controlled controlled airstrip. We will be doing it as an overflight and traffic pattern, coming down through the cloud layer, but luckily in a gap between them. I don't think a nice wine glass would be quite how you would be sipping drinks while flying an actual Caribou. I might get something a little more rugged and a little less made of thin glass. Quite possibly I would just have the branded energy drink can just as is. But I've decided that drinking my flight juice out of a fancy wine glass is part of the channel branding, just because I can. And it's nice to have the fancy stuff being used instead of sitting in a cupboard waiting for the right occasion. The right occasion for all of your nicest things is life. Celebrate, like, if something is worth keeping aside for a special occasion, then just remember that every day that you are alive and resisting the forces of capitalism and entropy is a day worth celebrating, and so you are also worth celebrating. This is a philosophical statement of almost no importance, but yeah, use the nice thing. The materials that are too good for the projects you're capable of doing, you'll be better at doing those projects after you use the nice materials. I have cut $50 to $100 a meter silk brocade. It's slightly terrifying, but then you get to wear something made out of really nice silk brocade. I have more of that. I have more of other brocades, and a bunch of that brocade is scraps. Unfortunately, the design motifs are a little too big for use on tiny projects like pouches, but okay, speed is 175 or so. So we're paying attention to that, coming down through 3,000 feet. Ooh, this cloud layer is just holding down a little bit deeper than I might otherwise have preferred. I do love the lovely 3D volumetric clouds. And one of the other things I've upgraded on Flight Sim recently is the realistic tree height mod. So these trees are looking a lot nicer than they were last time we were here. And one of my recent adventures, I have done a flight to and from Gabo Island just to make sure that I know what I'm doing with this and can do it interestingly on a stream. Because yes, it turns out that I do, not quite rehearsals, but I do make sure I know what I'm doing for some of these, and that manifold pressure crept up to 36, just as a demonstration of what happens when you get down into the thicker air. But I think 3,000 feet is a good altitude until we're past these mountains. So yes, the system that I'm using to check the weather for our landing and selecting which runway, or technically, well, which direction along the single grass strip is going to be best for our landing, is a little nav map, which you might recognize by the fact that it's also the program providing the minimap in the corner of the video. So previously I had to have it set into a special mode that only showed that little minimap so that I could have it, which meant I couldn't access all of its information features. But I have gotten better understanding of how OBS, the streaming software, works, so that I can have cropped versions of the program windows inserted into this. So I learned this while getting the chat on screen, because when I turn this into the recorded version rather than the stream, the live chat disappears, and I've decided that when people are talking to me and I'm responding, it will make a lot more sense if people can see the other half of the conversation. But so that is actually just the live chat window with the bottom trimmed off to hide the enter message here settings, enter message here box, and the top trimmed off to hide the live chat selection thing and menu stuff. I also worked out how to turn off the emoji reaction thing in the corner, which makes it much nicer. But so yes, learning how to do cropped insertions in OBS meant that I can have little nav map set to its full screen thing, and so long as I leave the central map set up properly, because the map is auto-centering on the plane, I can have all the information that goes down the side also visible. It is getting me to the point that I kind of wish I had 3 screens instead of 2. I do not have the desk space for 3 27-inch screens. That would be quite the setup. No, I'm not going to start thinking about how I would manage that, and the fact that I could mount a third, possibly 21-inch screen above these two. That's going too far. That's going mad with power. Although going mad with power is also fine. Anyway, little nav map is giving me semi-accurate weather reports, so it is not pulling from exactly the same. It is not pulling the weather from Flight Sim, and it's not pulling from perfectly the same source as Flight Sim, so there's some mismatch, but it's fairly accurate. Okay, so yes, Gabo Island, runway 24, surface soft, length 609 meters, headwind 9 knots, crosswind 17 knots. So this landing might be spicy. We might be demonstrating the Caribou's go around checklist, but we'll see. And we have Gabo Island in sight. I'm going to double check that my heading bug is set correctly for the runway. So 21, 2, 3. I don't know the exact runway heading. I only have the rounded to 2 significant digits version, as is used in runway naming. But as we come past these mountains, we can start to scout out Gabo Island. So I've done some short field landings in the Caravan on stream, but just to put the comparative weights of these planes into perspective, the Caribou is so max takeoff weight is 12.9 tons, metric tons, thousands of kilos. Also, if I click off screen, it actually tries to click on something just to the side of the screen in the cockpit, which is really annoying. But less annoying than it was, because it used to be with the old camera position that thing it would click if I clicked on the right screen. The thing that it would click on was the right engine feather button. So I would just start falling out of the sky for no reason. And that was annoying. But now it is the cover on the right engine DC system, which is a little bit like the right generator is a nicer thing to accidentally open the switch cover rather than hit the feather button. That was not fun. Okay, landing lights. Time for you to come on. Okay. Approach checklist. Landing lights on. Mixture to auto rich. Prop RPM to 2250. And we will do some more of the checklist as we get into a traffic pattern. But we are now into the descent into the pattern phase of flight, which I will be doing at 1,000 feet above sea level, because behold the sea. And just keeping track of the GPS pointer. And this is one of the times where, now that we are through the what you might call broad navigation steps of things, the GPS pointer actually becomes really useful for our approach. Oh, no more piney tree. This is sadness. You will get to miss the landing and everything, but thank you for coming along this far through things as we circle over towards where Gabo Island is. That is coastline, that is not the island. And you can see on the navigation that it is just behind us by a piney tree. Thank you for your leaf pun and your attendance to this much of the thing. We will unload the pine tree as a nice piece of cargo to sit on Gabo Island by the lighthouse. Okay, so here is Gabo Island. And there is the runway, landing strip, whatever else you wish to call it, and there is the lighthouse itself. So, first just overflight, checking conditions, letting the lighthouse keeper know that we are here. I am now really curious if there is a lighting system in Flight Sim for the lighthouse. That would be an interesting thing to see. Might have to fly here at night at some point. And yes, the reason for the selection of Gabo Island for this flight is that while we were doing the South Coast flights, I was entranced by this little island and its runway. So I decided that it just had to be the first destination for these flights. And I am being careful and focused about our altitude, because it will like to come down. And we are circling back. Slightly low. I need to not tip over quite so far, I think. But as we circle the island again, and as we watch our altitude, we look at the runway, and we see that it is clear. And then we turn away from the runway. Now, Flight Sim is saying that this is runway 24, and little nav map is saying that it is runway 23. So I'm going to believe Flight Sim. So, as we set up and retrim for the landing pattern, I am going to tweak that round to 240. Now to get our landing with a good amount of lead up, we fly away from the runway until we are not, 2 nautical miles away, despite all of our speeds. And I'm just gonna check the dome light. That dome light needs to be on now. That's better. Okay. And we want to be turning that way a little. Okay, so mixture auto bridge, prop a lever to 20 to 50. And this is where we start our slowing down and preparing for a full flaps landing. And we are currently above our flap extension speed. So, while maintaining a focus on our altitude, we cut the speed a little bit. We are, however, at our landing gear extension speed. So we pop those big draggy monsters out. Okay, we are 5 nautical miles out. Flaps 15. And notice that it immediately wants to jump into the sky as we drop the barn doors to stage 1. And oh look, we're down below about 90 knots. Which means we start focusing on our throttles and prop levers to a max increase. And as we make the turn, we set to flaps 20. Gabo Island traffic, Martel 15 is turning base leg for landing runway 24. And we come around and fly perpendicular to the runway. Directly into the sun isn't that handy. And we watch, so we have a GPS marker towards the airport, and we have a bearing marker towards the runway heading. So we fly the base leg until those two are a bit closer. Okay, we are at approximately 70 knots, so we want to be going a little harder on the engines. I may have mentioned before that the Caribou, once the barn doors start extending, likes to just stop in mid-air. So if we were in the Caravan with full flaps, we would be below our ideal landing speed and poking at the stall speed. And of course, as the flaps come out, it wants to throw the nose in the air. And, okay, flaps 25. Doing this as a nice gradual extension. Flaps 30. And I will not be dropping the last 10 degrees of flaps until we're closer. So we are on the final. And now we start looking very carefully at Gabo Island and making sure we have the runway in sight, because with no runway lights and it not being anything but a mode strip, it is actually a little bit easy to mistake one bit of green for another and not actually end up pointed at the runway, which is why we have the GPS pointer and the runway heading indicator to guide us in. If I wanted to be a little more technological, I could set up an RNAV approach, which is the GPS pretending to be an ILS system. Those are very useful. If this was a real-world flight and I was being super responsible, super on the ball, and had the other two crew members, I probably would be setting that up. But we are flying the all-manual Caribou with a dog for a co-pilot. So we're coming in pretty much on manual. And you can see that there's several grassy things on Gabo Island out there that might be the runway. And we are 5 nautical miles out. And flying pretty much where we need to be going. And I have what I believe to be the runway in sight. But we will get a little bit closer before absolutely deciding that we're committed. And as we are at flaps 30, our speed limit at the moment is actually 85 knots, which is the top end of the landing range for the Caravan. But this thing will land quite slow. So there, you might notice just below the front window here. Actually, as I zoom in, I notice that we are, in fact, not quite lined up. But there is the short field approach speed indicator. So at full flaps, that is a zoomed in tiny section of the airspeed indicator, just focused on the correct landing speed for a full flaps landing. So there's the diamond and the triangle. So I will want to be aiming my landing speed once we're at flaps 40 for pretty much exactly that little triangle. Basically, it's depending on your aircraft weight is which of those markers you want to be focusing on. Okay, short field landing checklist. Flaps set to 40 and approach speed is 74 knots. So, you know, quite slow. Which, luckily, so you know, it's a little bit of a concentration game, and we have 3 green on the landing gear. Always important to check. And there is the runway, and we are pretty much lined up with it now. But if you can't see the runway, you might have some appreciation for what I mean about this island is hard to spot the runway. Because there's this lovely green section off to the left that is exactly the colour of the grass for the runway. And that lovely long 2,000 foot strip that's so visible from the side is almost perfectly just a square at this angle. You can really see why they invented runway lights. And one of my favourite things about landing the Caribou at full flaps for a short field landing is that with full flaps you have to point the aircraft down to fly level. This is why it can do the wheelbarrow of just running the front gear and nothing else along the ground. But it does make it feel like you're trying to headbutt the runway. Gabo Island traffic, Martel 15 is on final or runway 2 for landing. And of course, despite it being just under 2 nautical miles when I make that announcement, we've still got a little bit of time as we finish our approach, and remembering that we have a spicy crosswind, which is why I am adjusting off to the side here and trying to keep everything And of course there's some trees just near the base of the runway, because of course there are. And there is the altitude alert for 250 feet. And coming in. This is fairly long for this plane. Oh, that was not a good landing because of all that crosswind. And flaps up, brakes on. So, short, narrow grass runway, heavy crosswind landing with heavy aircraft. Okay, gust lock handle engaged, flaps up, taxi light on, all landing lights off, and de-icing off. So, now we look around for where we are unloading. So I think first step will be turning us around. And so we saw the ability of the Caribou to reverse itself on the ground, and this sort of airfield is really what that capability is for, because the ground handling facilities here are somebody might come out with a pallet jack to help you unload, especially if you're bringing in 3 tons of furniture for them. And you know, the other ground maintenance facility is that they will mow the runway occasionally. So, I think we are going to just pull over to the side here. And as we brake. And the other thing that we're doing is listening to the traffic channel to make sure that nobody is going to try to land on top of us, but it is not exactly a popular airport, being a single lighthouse island. Okay, why is that not wanting to move? There you go. Wow, it really does not want to reverse on this grass. Okay. So, we're just going to unload here. So, cargo. Step 1, the people in the back can take their seatbelts off briefly. And the last thing here is the shutdown checklist, which we will not be needing. So, we start to open up the cargo doors and let that I do love the just watching and listening to the operation of that. It is just so satisfying. And just, it's a lovely view out here. Some seabirds and just, it's a lovely little view. It's a nice little island. Ah yeah, so there's the passenger door / emergency exits on this one, they are all just marked as emergency exits. And now I go into the flight sim weight controls, and so pallet number 3 in position 9 drops to 0 kilos, position 5 0 kilos, and position 1 0 kilos. So we've gone from over 100% of the weight capacity at this fuel level to 5%. Slightly lower because it also decided to reset the fuel level when we did that, but I remembered what it was set to before. But we wander back through the cabin, and just as we come up, one of the fun things about the Caribou is that it's very elevated pilot positions, because, you know, inside there is the, you know, electronics bay, the forward landing gear, importantly, and here is our bottom escape hatch. So if the plane is doing weird things such that I want to go out the bottom of the plane, that is the way out that Wing Commander Lamington and I will be taking. And here we've got more lovely electronics to either side, and some survival gear, intercoms, more survival gear, and then if we look up, we have the top emergency exit and also some air vents. But one of the main things that you'll see that top exit used for in flight is actually that it's a good spot to just open up and stand out the top for really good visibility while taxiing. I don't know how recommended that is, but it is definitely one of the commonly seen things. And yes, so, and there we have all of our lovely and, you know, big, like an emergency slide, which is a cable, you know, a thing that you can just throw out the back and throw out the top and slide down, because it's a long way down from the top of this plane. And a light to show that the ramp is at 15 degrees, which is its open in-flight position, and it also, if I enable that, will open even further. And if I just pop over to the external view briefly, you can see that it drops down ever so slightly further, which is really good for loading and unloading of heavy things, but it takes an override for that, so usually it will only go down to 15 degrees. But let's hop back into our seat, turn off the override, and these will both close. Because our next step, I go back to the initial checklist that we've got here. So we won't be doing the engine run-up checks, because we only really require those for the first flight of the day. But just while that is finishing up, flight plan clear. Invert flight plan. So we are now set for the 140 nautical mile flight back. Gonna clear off the altitude alert. So it's 6 knot headwind and 17 knot crosswind. That's, as mentioned before, a little bit spicy, but we will again be using runway 24, as that is the one that has the 6 knot headwind instead of crosswind, which is better than it might be. Okay. Gabo Island traffic, Martel 15 is taxiing to runway 24 for takeoff. We never actually announced being clear of the runway because really we never were. Okay, checking checklists, not doing the engine run-up. Before departure taxi checklist, rear cargo door is closed. Ramp and cargo switches off, and guard. Cargo door switch off. Cabin lighting is set. No smoking on. Fasten seat belts on. Cabin heating systems still set. De-icing switches, pitot heat back on. Flaps up. External lighting is on. Taxi lighting is on. I will be putting landing lights on now as well. Double checking that. Taxi clearance check. Okay. Beginning. Taxi. Back taxi along the runway. And being on slightly unkempt grass, it is a little bit more effort for the engines to get us a nice taxi. And so that is in fact the wrong direction to be taxiing. So we'll do a 180. Admire the seabirds. Enjoy the lovely tight turning circle of the Caribou with its ground handling is a luxury for the bourgeois. The fact that on this grass it has just a little too much desire to sink into the mud to properly reverse with the engines, that is a frustrating thing for me. I really would have liked to be able to back it up to somewhere to unload the cargo, but the cargo is unloaded. You can see a little puddle there. The joys of seaside runways. And for this, I will in fact be using directional braking just because, I mean, we're on grass. It's not exactly gonna flat spot the tyre to do that nice turnaround nice and tightly. Okay, parking brake set. Before takeoff checklist, parking brake set, QNH set, elevator trim in takeoff range. Oof, no it was not, that was in flight range. GPS system ready, check. Carb heat to cold. Prop levers max increase. Mixture to auto rich. Boost pump switches to normal. Fuel tank normal. DC generators on and guard. AC inverter main. Anti-collision lights are on. Landing lights are on. Engine instruments, no warning lights. Check. Fuel quantity. Check. Hooray for tankering. Flaps lever. Short field takeoff. Flaps 25. Takeoff clearance. Gabo Island traffic, Martel 15 taking off runway 24, departure to the north. Gust lock handle unlocked. And parking brake release. Okay. Short field takeoff checklist. Wheel brakes engaged. flaps 25, throttle to 30 inches of pressure, wheel brakes release, and throttle to maximum, which is 50 because we're at sea level. And crosswind is kicking in hard, 63 knots rotate, positive rate gear up, crosswind spicy, okay, VX 74 until we get 2,000 feet above the field. But that is a short field takeoff. 2,000 feet of grass, and we did it comfortably. Much more comfortably than we did the landing, even with that spicy crosswind. I've done a few crosswind takeoff and landings on the channel now, and it is interesting and fun, and we are just maintaining the runway heading for now. And we are... okay, we are clear of the airfield, lowering the nose to get us to 105 knots. Engine into METO settings. And making sure we maintain that speed. And flaps retracting by stages because we will not reach 105 knots with 25 degrees of flaps. I doubt we will reach it with 15. Which, well, our climb speed is in fact the 15 degree flap never exceeds speed. So we retract them by stages as the plane stabilizes at each setting, and we make sure to pull back on the trim. So there is 100 knots, and there is 2,000 feet. So we begin our climb and our turn out towards Canberra, tuning the radio across. Melbourne Centre, Martel 15 is typed to Havilland, Caribou, 3 miles west of Gabo Island, 2,300 feet, request flight following. Squawk 7055, Martel 15. Roger, QNH 3029er, Martel 15. Okay. That was a slightly exciting takeoff, especially with the giant sail of a tailplane that the Caribou has. Great for maintaining directional stability relative to the direction of flight, but when the wind is at 17 knot crosswind, it's, apparently dropped down to 15 knot crosswind. Oh, what a luxury. When you're accelerating through 15 knots, that is a 45 degree offset. When you're accelerating through 30, it's still something like a 30 degree offset. But even at, taking off at 63, that is a significant portion of your speed is actually sideways. But we are climbing out nicely, and gear confirmed up. Okay, a cruise climb checklist. Throttles set for METO power, propeller RPM set for METO, auto bridge, airspeed we can be aiming for about 105, which means we have some more climb in us. And our plane is significant, it's 3 tons lighter than it was when we landed, which is a luxury. So you'll see that maintaining that 1,000-foot climb is now actually a fairly slow climb for us, because we're not carrying 3 tons of pool table and other luxury furniture. That is all left behind on Gabo Island. And just glancing over at the stream timer, which we're at 2 hours 20 something. So this is definitely my longest stream, but I am feeling talkative today, so the return leg of the flight can just continue on as we are doing. And maintaining, so you know, about 1,000 feet per minute, nice and comfortable, getting us back up to 10,000 feet. Watching our engine settings as the air thins out again. Trimming to make sure I'm not applying pressure. Aileron trimming as well, because now that we're a lot lighter, that trim setting doesn't apply anymore. Okay, taxi lights off, landing lights off. Carb temperatures are looking okay. Outside temperature is all currently positive, because we've not climbed out too far yet. Definitely wants to get back into that little bit of a roll. Yes, the Caribou has been excellent for my learning of manual flying practices, because with these two big torquey engines that want to flip the plane over if you're not paying attention, and with that giant tailplane with its exceptionally authoritative rudder, there is a lot of trimming that you can do to make the plane do what you want, but it means that you have to be paying attention to the trim. So I've been learning about how trim works. And yes, one of the, from what I can find, least documented questions is, when do you use aileron trim and when do you use rudder trim? And it's essentially, one of them changes the roll and one of them pretty much changes the roll. So for the imbalance, such as my weight versus Wing Commander Lamington's weight, and the engine torque from these big radial engines, I am tending to use the aileron trim because that is directly roll, and then the gentle rolls that you get from just balancing everything out comes from the rudder. And one of the things that I've found is that if you use a little bit of both, it flies a lot better, because the more trim deflection, the more drag you're making. So if you can balance it between the two, you'll have a better time. And it looks to me like having the chat along the side of the screen is working nicely. This is definitely its first proper testing run, because we've had lovely amounts of conversation for me in the chat window. So that will be visible for those watching the recorded version later, to have some context about some bits of my nattering. And making sure we're staying approximately on course and approximately on speed as we come up through 8,500 towards 9,000 feet. And there is that roll trying to kick in. And remembering the way that the altimeter in this Caribou likes to show 9,000 flat, with the thousands indicator pointing where you would generally call about 94. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but I might have to repaint that at some point. I've not done too much modification to the inside of the Caribou. There was some staining on the seats that I think was just based on the photo textures from the real one modelled for this, so that I cleaned up nicely. but mostly I've been leaving the inside relatively unmodified while I've been doing all of my retexturing work. I have been having a lot of fun doing... There's a lot of little things you can edit with the textures once you get down into it. So, you know, upgrading to make sure they're nice, high-resolution textures, and a good Martel Air Freight livery, which I had a lot of fun designing. And we're coming up on 10,000 feet. So, what are our cruise settings at this weight? Current plane weight is 9,700. This thing has very different cruise settings when you are nearly empty rather than over full. So the engine performance tables that come with the various manuals give you performance figures up to 15.4 tons, despite the fact that it doesn't recommend you take off over 12.9. We were at 13.4, I think. But the minimums on the tables are 9,000 tons, and we are at 9.7. So we take the 9,000 numbers at 10,000 feet, which will be lean, 28.6 and 1,600. So the engines will be working a lot less hard to keep us cruising nicely at 10,000 feet at empty cargo than full. So, yes, 28.5, 18. So we set the nose to get us a 10,000 foot cruise. And as mentioned before, the numbers in the cruise configuration are fairly forgiving just based on how close they all are to each other. And worst comes to worst, you set it to 30-20. But if you want maximum performance, or so it's not the maximum range cruise, it is the maximum cruise, which is essentially, I want to be flying as far as possible while also getting there this week, because there are some some maximum endurance settings at which you barely make any forward progress at all, it feels like. But we set the nose such that we are basically cruising, and then we set to 28.5, and we set to 16 or 18. 1,800. And there's that roll it wants to do. And when we're down at 1,800, we get that lovely rumbly sound from the engines, because these are lovely big twin Wasp rotary engines. Very, very nice sound out of them. I do enjoy that noise. It is so much nicer than jets. Okay. That is 9,500. We want to get up a bit from there. $116 nautical miles to go, because that climb took us 25 nautical miles or so. And we're just climbing calmly back towards our 10,000 foot cruising altitude. Might give it a little bit more beans just to get us back up there. So I took off with 80% fuel load just to make sure that we would have enough to get to Gabo Island with our full fuel load and to get home again. The decision to make the Martel Air freight flights round trips is, it essentially makes them the option for when I want to do a longer stream and also be concentrating for all that time. Because in the caravan I can zone out and get chatting and go into the Banjo Paterson. I don't think it would be safe to start on the Banjo Paterson while flying the Caribou. It's a little bit more of a challenge mode than I'm currently set up for. And once we set that cruise power, which is 27.0, 128.5, and that's 1800. So it's definitely working the engines a lot less hard. But, we're still maintaining 134 knots across the ground, which is lovely. I think that headwind we were flying into might be a tailwind now, because our airspeed is a little over 100. The Caribou has a very fascinating airspeed indicator, which there's a lovely zoomed in view. So just to the left of the attitude indicator, so we've got, it gives us 1 to 400 knots despite maxing out at 208, and that's on the needle. And then it has the little wheel inside there that gives you, a bit more accurate to within the 20 knot range visible on the wheel at any one time. So that's a fun little way to do things. And then, as mentioned, we've got the landing zoomed in airspeed indicator, which is just, I think that gives us about a 30 knot window of where our speed is sitting, which is useless for everything but a short field full 40-degree flap landing, and the one time you need it, it's really handy. And it's also directly in your line of sight as you're facing at the out along the nose of the plane, so that when you're doing those short field landings, you're not looking any further away from outside than you have to. It's really quite a nice little bit of design. There is a blank panel there where Wing Commander Lamington would have his. He has most of the instruments duplicated, including the radar altimeter off to the side there. But in place of the fuel system controls that I have, he has the controls for things like the jump lights and the generators. So, yes, where I have the oxygen system control panel, he has the jump light control panel, which is not properly modelled in a flight sim. But essentially, there is the get ready to jump and jump lights that we can switch on, and Wing Commander Lamington has the switches for that. I have the cockpit mask oxygen control switches in their place. And then where I have the fuel switches, like the boost pumps and everything, Wing Commander Lamington has the generators and the light switches, which is quite useful. And he also has that lovely little reference sheet that when I am flying normally, I can see and you cannot, because it is hidden behind my face. But just down here, this is what I keep glancing at to check my reference speed. So we've got the maximum speed 208, the normal maximum speed of 165. I don't know what VA is exactly. VLG, landing gear, so do not extend the landing gear over to 120 knots. Cargo door does not get a fancy V, it's just 120 knots. Do not open the cargo door. And then flaps at 0 to 15, 20, 30, 40. And of course, despite that and some other indications, we have the flap positions are 0, 15, and then every 5 degrees until we hit 40. And at 40 degrees, those barn doors make a lot of air go downwards. The fact that they have those very big flaps right behind the engines so that they are directing the exhaust gets pulled downwards a little bit, but they are piston engines, so that's not too much. But you also have the wash from those really quite big propellers, all just pushing downwards and making the... So the part of why dropping the barn doors slows you down so much is not only are they sticking into the airflow of, the wind over your wings and causing drag, but they're essentially capturing the bottom half of the propeller wash and dropping that downwards as well. So not only do you have more stuff stopping airflow, but you have some of the forwards push that you've got getting just straight up redirected to downwards, which is really good for slowing you down and giving you lots of lift. It's why they are quite so big in the overwing, the flaps behind the engines. I'm just going to switch us over to that tail-mounted. Okay, once I get it stabilized and trimmed nicely, because it doesn't quite want to hold its altitude. There we go. Oop, nope. Come on. Because yes, adjusting the elevator trim is not actually changing your vertical speed, it's changing your the change in vertical speed, which is really complicated physics to balance it. Essentially, the way that you do the calculations for that is you use the joystick or yoke or other controls to set it so that it is doing what you want, and then you fiddle with the trim until you're not having to put pressure on the controls anymore, which is how you shortcut all of the very complicated physics maths. Well, it's not so much shortcutting, it's using the inbuilt calculator that is physics happening to do the complicated calculations. Because if you tried to just work out the trim positions based on the rate of change of vertical speed, which is rate of change of altitude, you're getting into some 3rd and 4th level derivatives, which is fascinating. Just refilling up my beverage to make sure that I can keep talking. There we go. That's holding a bit more nicely. Just a little bit of rubber trim. As I was saying, let's pop over to... Oh, listen to that rumble. So this is essentially a GoPro mounted to the tip of the tail, and we can see the lovely paint job all the way down the back of the plane, and that fade from wine into hot pink onto the wingtips. I'm very happy with that effect. And this is quite a strange little angle to be looking at the plane from. But you can see how there's very big wing flaps directly behind the engines. Very spicy. Very good for making lift. Just cycle through some of the other external cameras. Oh, on the wingtip looking in, and the other wingtip looking in, and underneath looking forwards you can just see the oh, that's a good noise. I don't know how well it's coming through on the stream and if I need to talk up over it or anything, because I've just got my ears filled with the rumble of those engines. And here we are, and you can see the heat haze effects of the exhausts from that lovely big engine. And just making sure that I am paying attention to how the aircraft is flying. Here we are on the tail. And you can see one of the lovely big beacon lights and the reflective rubber that is the de-icing boot along the front edge. That I am delighted that I have got the textures to the point that it actually holds together on this closer scrutiny. That is rather pleasing to me as a designer. And a slightly different angle on the other tail wing. And you can see that I've even managed to colour in that beacon light's electrical cable orange. That took more fiddling than I was expecting. And another view under the wing and the engines. I feel like we've probably drifted to the right from our path. So we'll see once we get back into the cockpit. Oh, that's a good view. As you can see on the engine there, we've got a wing inspection light, just so that when we're flying at night, we can flick that on and see the ice along the leading edge of the wings, and hopefully see it enough to make it not be there anymore. And back to the tippy top. And we are at least flying northwards along the coast, which is fairly good for our alignment. Yes, one of the things you may notice I've also been working on is the camera controls and the two different camera modes and what you can and can't do with them. Well, technically, 4 different camera modes in 2 sets. But, we pop back into the cabin there, and we are only 100 feet below our altitude, and we are only about 30 degrees off our GPS heading, so that's not too bad. But that was a lovely little tour of the externals of the plane, and it's a delightfully mechanical thing. One of the things that I love watching is mechanical engineering of various devices, and so that means I end up with a lot of military engineering stuff, because that's what people are making content about, because that's what a certain section of the population likes. I am just going to give us a little bit of carb heat. That looks good. Just get that back into the white zone. And lean out the mixture nicely. I might set it to 20 and 30 just because we don't need maximum cruising range. We've still got 1,000 pounds of fuel in each wing. But yes, the thing about watching the military engineering stuff is essentially after the end of World War II and maybe a little bit later, it all gets very boring because everything starts getting automated, including half of the design work. So the Caribou is in that period where it's all good, solid engineering, but like some of the stuff from like the 1850s, I wish there was more of that. Like the sort of engineering that gets done by a man in a flat cap in a garden shed. That's the sort of engineering I'm after. if I wasn't so invested in my medieval history stuff, one of the things I would be doing is setting up to make my own steam engines, because that's the sort of nerd that I am. I love making things, and steam engines are, I was going to say cool, but that's kind of the opposite of how they work. They are an external combustion engine. So, you know, heat important. That's kind of how steam do. We are, with the slightly increased away from maximum cruise, we are now doing 170 knots across the ground, which is lovely. And yes, over-engineered strong aircraft. That is, like, engineered, but by people, not by just running simulations. That's the good stuff. Like, the Caribou will do whatever you ask of it, as the, you know, sturdy, loyal mule analogy would have it. But, you know, as you get into the more modern stuff, Boeing and notwithstanding, you start getting into its, you know, we can calculate all of the forces involved, so we can narrow the tolerances a bit, and we can automate everything so that you can't screw it up. Whereas on this, like your electrical system, yeah, you forget to turn the generators on before you take off. The plane's not really going to tell you. Some of your gauges won't work if the AC inverter's not on, like I believe it's the fuel gauges actually run off the AC system, so when that flicks off, you'll notice that the fuel gauges instantly go to 0. But if you try to take the Caribou off without switching on your DC generators, it will fly just fine and not tell you anything's wrong. Except for, you know, the little warning lights down between these switches. So if you're not checking your warning lights, you're going to have a bad time. Until 5 to 10 minutes into the flight, when your electrical system shuts off completely because your battery's gone flat. At which point, you turn the generators on very quickly and concentrate very hard, partly on flying and partly on prayer. And partly on apologising to the corgi. I love having that button. So yes, there's a few things about the Caribou that are not modelled in flight sim, such as this big emergency brake lever, which is an air accumulation brake. So essentially you've got, so that's the lever, in fact hidden behind the text. So this big lever here, basically on the windscreen pillar, and you pull that, and air tanks slam the wheel brakes on, and can't be unlocked without powering them, and then have to be recharged. But if you need to stop the plane stops, which is used for if you have hydraulic failures and that sort of thing, and you really need to stop the plane. So, given that Flight Sim doesn't model failures as heavily as real life does, that is not modelled. The auto feather system, which is essentially, if one of your engines fails, you need to feather the props such that they are not providing 13-foot diameter pieces of drag on one side of the plane. And the auto feather system is meant to kick in if you get more than a certain level of mismatch between the two propeller RPMs. Unfortunately, Flight Sim only models those for turboprops for some reason. It's a weird little bug in the code. And yes, there is a lot of detail in this aircraft. I have been going through and tweaking a lot of the files to make more of the switches work. Like a lot of these circuit breakers did not actually function in the base aircraft, but I am very clever and worked out how to make it do that. I have reworked how a bunch of, like, the lighting potentiometers are now set up a lot better than they were. A few of the other switches now work. So I've done a lot of little modifications on how the systems work. I have not touched the engines because the engines and aerodynamic modelling is a dark art for people with engineering degrees, and I have an IT degree. So I've done all of the interior little fun bits. So there's a lot of these lights that have a push to test. So you click it and it lights up. Unfortunately, Flight Sim also highlights the control you're hovering over blue, which makes the push to test harder to see because it lights up blue and then lights up orange in the middle. But I have had some fun making sure all of those work. There's a couple of the switches that were not functional that now are. Actually, one of my favourite little features is this radio console. Slides away. For when you're getting in and out of the plane, in and out of the pilot seats, and you want that to be going, getting out of the way so you're not stepping on it. And it has cup holders. Love cup holders. So yes, they've actually modelled that to slide away. It's quite cool. Yes, I have been doing quite a bit of study on the systems and internals of the Caribou. A lot of it from Royal Australian Air Force sources because they were the ones operating them the longest out of most of the militaries doing things. But I've been doing a lot of study just to make it so that I can get more and more of the little features of it fine-tuned to how I want it. And some of it is they didn't include things, and this is actually documented in the files of system not functional on model aircraft. So the aircraft that they based their modelling off had a few differences from standard. So just double checking our trim and heading. So one of them is the cabin lights. This plane has white off and green for the rear cabin, which is not typical. And on the cockpit lighting, you've got off, white and night vision, which is again not typical. The green and the NVC marks there would actually be red on the typical aircraft, and well, one, they are not actually functional. I've not been able to make the switch go to... I've not been able to enable the red cabin lighting as found in the typical Royal Australian Aircraft version. But essentially, the coloured light for the back, so green in this one, quite possibly for night vision goggle compatibility, but red for maintaining low light vision is just so that when you're doing night operations, one, you're not lighting the plane up like a beacon but you can still see inside the cabin, and two, when people are going to jump out, they've not had their night vision ruined by being in a brightly lit cabin, but they can still see where everything is to get their parachutes set up properly and not trip over anything on the way out the back. So yes, this one has green where typically it would be red. It's a fascinating little detail. And one of the other little details that they've included is just next to the cargo door, which, if I just bring us down there, you can see just off to the left here, there's a broom tucked into the side there, just ready to go. Anyway, back to the cockpit. And we're still fine. But yes, there is a nice old school broom tucked into one side of the tail interior structure, just so that you can sweep things out once the dirty paratroopers have disembarked. Or, you know, presumably once you've just finished loading cargo on a dusty or muddy field. But I think it's a charming little detail. Okay, we are cruising along at 170 knots across the ground, and we are now 53 nautical miles from Canberra. So this second half of the flight has indeed gone a lot quicker, because where we were managing 120 knots south, we managed 170 knots back north. But yes, so given that the purchase of this from the Flight Sim store was by a viewer, I have to say a definite large thank you for getting me this piece of joy that I have absolutely fallen in love with this plane. It is so good. In fact, and the first bit of modification that I did, in fact, what got me editing the files in the first place, having the co-pilot visible inside the cabin takes some modification of the files. So, and essentially copying what the interior of the cabin will show up like from outside the plane, setting that to be visible from inside as well, or basically at detail level 0. So I just copied the co-pilot positioning marker from detail level 1 into detail level 0. But we have to have Wing Commander Lamington visible inside the plane with us. Having him be here in spirit would have been a little bit sad. And I don't know if my voice is fading at all, but this is definitely the most talking I have ever done in one session in at least a year. Especially while sober. I do get this talkative when I have had some delightful adult beverages. I tend to describe being drunk as being extroverted, because I do get just very chatty. But yeah, approximately this level of chatty, but given that according to the street stats down in one corner, I have been going for 3 hours, and we still have 46 nautical miles to go, plus taxiing and shutdown. So this will definitely be the longest stream so far by about double. But it seems to be going well for me, and people seem to be popping in and out of the view. So it will definitely be a good recording to have on the channel. I think it will definitely be one that people can use for just some company in the background while they're doing things, which is something I've been told that people find these useful for. But yes, so you know, if you need 3.5 hours of me chattering away with some engine noise in the background, then, you know, it will help you get through a lot of making things as you work. And yes, I was expecting the long stream. It is, in fact, going... I was expecting about 2.5 hours, because it's about an hour-long flight each way. But once you get the weather, the taxi time, going through the full engine run-up checklist, which I do enjoy that engine run-up checklist of just set up the engine for the different power levels and see how it performs, double-checking everything, because these are big, chunky World War II engines, which I just delight in. But I enjoyed the engine run-up checklist just as a really nice bit of procedural work. The way that they would usually be done requires a ground crew for keeping a watch on all of the things from the outside and checking your flaps position, that they extend evenly and all that good stuff. But that's why I investigated how to do the externally mounted cameras, because, you know, as part of the role-playing realism type part of this whole bit that I've got, oh, these are some clouds. But as part of the role-playing realism bit that I do, and I am sticking to the bit because commitment to the bit is important, not doing the free-floating camera external views while in flight, but working out that we have these lovely, it's essentially a, you know, various camera positions mounted to the fuselage. I have delighted in learning about that, and in learning that there is in fact a button that you can press while you are in the second set of camera modes to re-enable all of your flight controls. Because usually in those camera modes, the controls get remapped to modifying what the camera is doing. So it's, especially in the drone camera mode, all of your controls get set for flying the drone around your plane instead of flying the plane, which is fine if you're on autopilot, but not good in a Caribou. Because it turns out, if you're in that mode and you hit, I believe the default binding is C for, you know, camera, you can revert it to flight controls rather than camera controls, so you can have the external view and not crash. It's wonderful. Oh, we are 35 nautical miles from Canberra, so let's start that descent. I think we will do 1,000 feet. And of course, as we pick up the speed from the descent, it wants to pull back up again because we've sped up, more lift. Okay. About -7 outside the plane. Okay, de-icing switches set. Throttle levers set. Prop to cruise. Fuel boost is normal. Fuel tank selector normal. No smoking sign and seatbelt lights are on. Altimeter QNH set. And balancing the altitude. And we'll see if the controller in this will redirect us to the Canberra approach frequency, or if we'll need to do that ourselves. It can be a little bit variable what flight sims traffic control stuff will do. But we are definitely getting into the more familiar bits of nice vertical stripes of mountains, I believe. I'm not sure if that valley is the one that we flew up to get back from Coombe. No, we are too far to the east for that stream up from Coombe. But we will drop down to about, I think 6,000 is our safe altitude in this area. But we will keep our eyes open. 160 knots, which is 200 across the ground. And we are 27 nautical miles from Canberra. We will see which runway they end up putting us into. It was runway 17 was active on our way in. On our way out. So if the wind direction has held, the wind is certainly quieter outside, so the thing about flying into Canberra is that looking outside actually does give me at least some information. Not that I am sharing the wind conditions of the airport or that Flight Sim's live weather is 100% accurate, but it's a nice little bit of information, and it's a weird way to be able to check. It's not like I have a windsock in my backyard. I kind of want one now. But yes, given that this morning it was gusting up to 30, that was up to 30 knots, which is about 50 k's. That was some loud weather. And with the nice streaming headphones on, I have not been able to hear what the wind is doing. I'm definitely glad that I've made sure to set up an extra drink for myself before starting this stream, because, you know, out there is the airport Canberra approach handoff. Going to 125.9er, Martel 15, goodbye. Canberra approach, Martel 15, 6,300 feet. Martel 15, request permission to transition Charlie airspace. Clear through Charlie airspace, Martel 15. I am rather enjoying doing the ATC comms roleplay verbally, because it's just that lovely little extra bit of stuff to do. Watching the manifold pressure as we come in, and there is 6,000 feet. Southerly, hidden behind the emoji icon, knots gusting to 22. So that is less wind than it was as we were departing, and hopefully, given that it is a fairly north-south runway, that means we will not be dealing with a 17-knot crosswind this time. That would be nice. But it was certainly a nice test of my hand flying and other such things, to be able to do that landing with a 17-knot crosswind on a 2,000-foot narrow grass runway. I'm glad it wasn't any narrower or any closer to the trees, but I feel good about making that landing and the takeoff shortly after, because 17 knots gusting to 22. Now that the chat window has scrolled enough that the OBS live chat feed is not hiding it behind that YouTube chat emoji button that is only partially hideable. But winds straight down the runway almost perfectly. That will be lovely. And it does rather show you why the main runway of Canberra Airport is aligned the way that it is. Because they picked the runway direction based on the predominant wind direction. The reason that Gabo Island is such an interesting landing challenge is that they didn't have the space to have that option. On this lovely good sheep paddock ruined that is Canberra, the airport had all these options of where to put its runways, and we'll put the roads around it later. So you can get it set up such that you are doing winds straight along the runway for the most part. And if you have a second main wind direction that happens sometimes, that's why you have that second runway, where we're always just crossing over runway 12/30, because it is the inactive runway. But sometimes when the wind is being a bit disagreeable, they will use the shorter alternate runway instead. But we are getting into where we need to be, and we've got the clearances from Canberra approach. So we tune to Canberra Tower. Canberra Tower, Martel 15 is 10 miles southeast, 6,400 feet, with information Yankee to land. Enter left traffic runway 17, Martel 15. Okay. So, runway 17. Which I will set that to mark where runway 17 is pointing. Just so that I can line up the GPS pointer with it. And I believe that is the airfield in sight. So, approach checklist, landing lights on. And let's get our descent happening. Mixture to auto rich. RPM to 2250, and watching our speed. And it is definitely not a short field landing on Canberra Airport, given that it is used for both military operations and I think it can take up to a 777, so we do not need to use our short field setups. Ooh, but it's a bit bumpy. They are reporting winds 177 at 17, so that is confirming the wind settings so kindly looked up for me. So yes, 7 degrees of that 17 knots is the crosswind component, which is maths I am not doing. Line up that runway heading marker on the gyro compass with the opposite heading, which is essentially flying the flight path for runway 35, which is my usual takeoff, because the winds are backwards to their normal. It's wild. And we watch our distances and headings and altitude and the hills. Clear to land runway 17, Martel 15. But we are not ready to make that turn back onto the runway heading. So we are cleared, but not immediately just rushing to aim towards the runway and kill ourselves. So, pulling back. Now we don't want to drop all the way down to a 1,000 foot pattern because of these mountains / hills here. They are a little too crunchy, and they do make heavily loaded takeoffs from runway 35 a little bit interesting. So I want to be turning after that mountain such that I can be lined up while keeping it in account Okay, landing gear down, flaps 15, prop RPM to max, maintaining flight speed while doing all of these speed cutting maneuvers, and adjusting that nose trim because it wants to drop. And we're at about 5 nautical miles, and we want the taxi lights on as well. And we are past, I think it's Mount Ainslie, the one that is annoying me. I will need to double check on a map. I have 2 different memories of navigating this area, one from the air and one on the various roads around here. It's always fun. Okay, let's turn to that landing. And our landing speed is going to be 7374-ish. Lovely views of Canberra that we are not lingering over to watch. There is a mountain, there is a runway. And making sure to keep us below 100 knots because 105 is our flap limit. 3 green, brakes are off, including the parking brake. So yes, approximately 73 knot landing speed. But let's get this approach. And of course, being such a leisurely approach by flight speed standards, we don't need to panic and overcorrect. We can just get ourselves lined up on the center line. Oh, this is so much more relaxing than Gabo Island. Look at how much more visible that runway is for a start. A little high according to what I can see of the puppy lights, yes. Speed's creeping up as we try and make sure we get the descent. Okay, so one red confirms that the puppy lights are actually functioning for us. This is where having a 2K or 4K monitor would be lovely, just to get that little bit more detail on the landing vision as we come in. So we remain a little high, but that is not a problem. We have plenty of runway. There we go. That's the path we want. Nice and stable, and nice and comfy. Nice and feeling like we're in a hot air balloon because a Caribou on approach is just such a floaty little beast. And we have all the time in the world to not stress. And we don't have a 17 knot crosswind. It's amazing how much easier a runway with good lighting and control and the runway set up into the wind is how much more easy that is than a grass strip on an island where the only controlling factor of where we put the strip is where it'll fit. And then once we land, we have a nice, calm taxi back to our parking spot, and then a very quick dash across to the airport bathrooms. Creeping high again, because this thing wants to float. Little bit crosswind, but nothing to worry about. I don't know why I slipped into this calming voice. Maybe it's the fact that I've been talking for nearly 3.5 hours. And that this landing is so much simpler than the last one. But if I screw this one up after getting the other one reasonably okay, it will be very embarrassing. We're landing long, but that's okay. It's better than landing short. And better than landing hard. You cross the threshold at about 100 feet, where ideally you want to cross it at about 50. Nice and calm. Big skid marks where other people have landed their planes. And we just gently set it down on those marks. And then we maintain a bit of our speed for the rollout, just to get clear of the runway in a good amount of time. And here's our taxiway. That was quite a gentle landing. I'm rather proud of that one. And as said, after the managing the landing on Gabo Island, I would have been embarrassed if I'd slammed that into the tarmac a little hard. And we pull off the runway and pause. Going to ground frequency on 121.7, Martel 15. Canberra ground, Martel 15, requests taxiing to parking or gate. Taxiing to gate 11 via taxiway Juliet to Bravo, cross runway 30 Bravo, Martel 15. And yes, I definitely feel like the hand flying has been good for me, even just as a meditative exercise. After landing checklist. Flaps up. Gust lock on, taxi light on, landing lights off, anti-collision lights off, de-icing off, taxi clearance check, after landing checklist complete. Okay, let's taxi away home. And they've put us at gate 11, which is an interesting one. Because, so, gates 2 and 3 at Canberra Airport are just apron gates that, you know, largish planes can park at while, not providing the jetway and other parking services. The other gates are big enough that they have the jetways, which will not connect to Caribou. There is no way to do that, and also no point to doing that, because we don't even need them to bring us stairs. And crossing runway 30. and it has not given us the taxiway markers that I am used to, so that's an interesting little adaptation. And there is the sound of someone else coming in for their landing, I do. Oof, yep, there's their landing. Okay, and I believe we are going... So that's gate 9's turn off, so gate 11 will be one of the ones over here. One of the most useful things about the Canberra Airport upgrade pack that I acquired for streaming purposes is the taxiway markings, which now include gate numbers and such for these turn-off lines. So I can see that it is marked gate 11 on here. And we turn in and we see our ground staff and the little power truck and some pigeons. And as you can see, the jetways are absolutely massive compared to this thing and set up for planes that are twice as tall. So if I wanted to use that, I would have to use the emergency exit to the top of the plane. And we park nice and far forward. And you can see they've actually modelled the inside of the terminal, which is delightful. A lovely little bit of detail there. But there are the doors that you'll be going back into the terminal by, and we can see generic billboards afoot. So that's the doors for gate 10, so it'll in fact be this lovely section over here. And there's, more engineering stuff that I would have to upgrade other parts of Flight Sim to make work. But that is our arrival in Canberra Airport after the end of the flight. So, shutdown checklist. Parking brake handle set. No smoking light off. Seatbelt light off. Cockpit and cabin heating systems off. De-icing switches off. Boost pumps off. And the, let's see here, wing and tail lights off. Check cylinder head temperatures below 180. Check. Mixture cut off. Ooh, cream cakes. Lovely. And then ignition switches off. Rear cargo door. We will open that up. Just watch that ticking along. Lovely. Even if it doesn't show cargo, I do love the internal modelling on this. It's a lovely little padded room for us to put everybody in. Okay. Cargo door switches off. Attention passengers, this now concludes our round-trip cargo flight from Canberra to Gabo Island, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our large sky truck. Please wait until the door is opened and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present to the pilot and co-pilot, and enjoyed thoroughly. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Okay. Internal lighting off. AC inverter off. Battery switch off. And that concludes the shutdown procedure for the Caribou. That was a fun and a very long flight and stream. I hope everybody has enjoyed all of the ramblings along the way. Oop, that is an odd camera angle. But here we have the very odd sight of a Caribou parked at a proper gate with the back door open. And I had a lot of fun putting the Martel Air Freight logo on the back of the cargo ramp, where the Australian Air Force ones will put the plane registration number. So just a little fun bit of detailing I got to put in on that. But I am going to sign off here as we pass the 3.5 hour mark, and I will see you all next week.